So let's talk about the darkness. Humanity's collapse is shrouded in mystery. Not many records remain. Even so, we are able to infer things about what exactly happened at the collapse through the records that remain, including looking at the various beliefs of what exactly the nature of the darkness is from those within the city. Generally, the darkness was anything that took humanity's paradise away, any enemy of humanity, especially anything not human. It was Guardians' duty, their destiny, to reclaim all of Sol from the darkness. The speaker tells of the darkness as a cosmic force that swept over us and caused the collapse, and that it was coming back. Others portrayed the darkness as a moral force, an actualization of evil, perhaps emerging from within the system. Others just regard it as an invading alien armada, possibly a post-singularity intelligence with weak acausal powers. Other groups deemed any efforts to try and understand the darkness futile. Ulan Tan, the controversial warlock, considered it a necessary symmetry to the Traveler in the cosmic balance. We do have a record from Rasputin from the collapse that does regard it as a causal. While the true nature of the darkness wasn't exactly known and widely debated, there was another side to that coin that was to imply that the Traveler somehow triggered the collapse, or it had known the darkness was coming for it and hoped to use the solar system as protection. Well, those beliefs were labeled as heretical, and many Guardians and civilians have been banished from the city for holding and spreading those beliefs. During my time as a Guardian, we've had many violent encounters with the Hive. Some even blame us for awakening it, but whatever. Hive magic was really our first foray into understanding what exactly the darkness is, and perhaps we should start with talking about Toland. For the warlock Toland, the Shattered, the Hive presented a logic that was undeniable, that was made self-evident by the universe itself. This was a logic of death and destruction, the logic of the sword. Toland wagered that a gentle place, ringed in spears, would not survive the sword logic. As our enemies, the Hive and their ascendant gods, sharpen their sword through death and trial, their existence would eventually and inevitably triumph over ours. Their shape of victory was to rule the universe so absolutely that nothing will ever exist except by their consent. According to the sword logic, existence is a game that everything plays, and some strategies are winners. There is no reason for it. They are simply the winning play. It's worth noting that Toland's obsession with this led him to pursue transcendence, quote-unquote, through this very logic, and this was a price he was willing to pay with his own life and the own lives of his fire team. During my time as a Guardian, the Hive's dark rituals weakening the Traveler's light were stopped, which had interesting implications for exactly how the darkness and light worked. It seems Ulan Tan was correct when describing light as a force that is connected across space and time. After that, and with the help from a stranger from another time and the Awoken, a brave Guardian discovered a sect of Vex who inhabited the mysterious Black Garden, an ontology adrift in time and space. Now, an important question here is that the Vex, who harbor minds that spanned galaxies, if they found worship and devotion more effective than any behavior, well, the Vex would adopt worship. Whatever dark thing the Vex found or made in the garden, it transcended even their power over space and time. Nevertheless, the Black Heart was destroyed and the Traveler could truly begin to heal. Eventually, Eris hobbled her way into the tower, don't tell her I said that, with the news of Crota's eventual return as the Hive were trying to summon him on Earth. Eris Morn, a member of Toland's Fallen Fire team, was a very important guide for us in explaining exactly how to stop Crota's return and slay Crota once and for all. You see, she explained that the Ascendant Hive use their sword logic to carve spaces into reality. When you enter these spaces, these world minds of the Hive, you obey their logic, their sword logic. And if that logic can be beaten inside a Hive God's throne, the Ascendant Hive will truly die. Out of desperation for revenge, justice, and putting an end to the Hive's reign of terror on the moon, a fire team reached out to Toland the Shattered for guidance. And the only survivor, Eris Morn, crawled out of the Hellmouth, transformed by the horrors witnessed in its depths. But with this new knowledge allowed the Guardians to go into the Hellmouth, slip through the keyhole between realities, enter Crota's Ascendant Realm, and put an end to him with his own sword, thus destroying the god for good. Make no mistake, Hive magic is their own, but this is the Hive worshipping the darkness. The Hive do this through the sword logic, yes, but it's through what we would come to know as paracausality, the ability to subvert the causal laws of physics. Just as the light grants this ability to the Guardians, the Hive too represent a dark mirror. The Black Heart, an entity of darkness so powerful that the Vex could not comprehend it, an evil so dark it despises other evil, is contrasted in the light with our light elements, solar, arc, and void. These elements are said to be the fundamental forces of the universe. Solar is the pure expression of energy as quanta. The binding forces, those that connect and release energy through fission, well, that is arc. And the energy of the vacuum of space and the fabric of space and time, well, that's the void. These forces are all connected across space and time, and these elements make up our physical reality. And with the light, the Guardians can wield them, bend causality to their will, and make their own fate. Into the void, the spark. From the spark, the fire. And after the fire, the void. Guardians before my time in the city would remember when even the use of void light itself was deemed blasphemous, and those who used it were compared to Hive wizards. But in time, the vast infinity of the void was understood as another form of light. Again, thanks to this warlock named Ulantan. Yeah, we'll be bringing him up a lot. Nevertheless, it is concerning that those that question the speaker, the traveler, the innate goodness of the light, these people were ostracized, and particularly problematic public individuals and factions were banished from the city. When Crota's father, Oryx, arrived in the Sol system, the god of the Hive, and proclaimed taken king, he sought to utterly destroy the light. Our knowledge of the sword logic and how to put down a Hive god would come into the ultimate test. Oryx brought with him his dreadnought, a throne world pushed inside out into the material world. This ship held immense power that could destabilize the entire system. But inside his dreadnought, the Guardians discovered calcified fragments of memory. This was a record of the Hive's history, of Oryx's history. The Books of Sorrow told a tale of a species long ago that was pushed to the edge of extinction and drained of all hope. This drove them to dive into the deep of their planet, only to find a power that promised salvation, promised them eternal life and power, all at a great cost. The worm gods promised the Krill the universe through a bargain. The three Krill sisters, Aurash, Zero, and Sathona, needed to take into their bodies the worm's children. From these worms, they would obtain eternal life. They would gain power over their own fragile flesh, and the power to make of it as they will. The most important thing, however, was that if they found an imperfection in the world, an injustice or an inconvenience, they would have the power to repair it. Yol the honest worm said to them, "Let no mere law bind you. We ask one thing in exchange, O princes. You must obey your nature forever. In your immortality, Orash, you may never cease to explore and inquire for the sake of your children. In your immortality, 0, you may never cease to test your strength. And in your immortality, Sothona, you may never abandon cunning. If you do, your worm will consume you. And as your power grows, O princes, so will your worm's appetite. Aurash became Aurix, king of the hive and the first navigator. Sothona became Savathun, mother of the hive and goddess of cunning. And 0 became Zuvu-Arath, goddess of war. The worms acknowledged the sky, something that we've come to interpret as the traveler visiting the planet of the Krill. The worms told the new hive that the worms told these new hive gods that the sky was a philosophy of cosmic slavery, that it seeds civilizations predicated on the quote-unquote terrible lie that right actions can prevent suffering, that pockets of artificial rules can defy the final, beautiful logic. This, according to the worms, was antithetical to the nature of reality, where deprivation and competition are universal. In the deep, they enslave nothing. Liberation is not their passion. They exist to help the universe achieve its terminal self-forging glory. The honest worm said to Aurix, "You are no longer bound by causal closure. Your will defeats law. Kill 100 of your children with a long blade, Aurix, and observe the change in the blade. Observe how the universe shrinks from you in terror. Your existence begins to define itself. You must obey your nature. Your worm must feed." From this, the young Aurix learns the overwhelming cosmic truth of the sword logic, that our universe gutters down towards cold entropy, that life is an engine that burns up energy and produces decay. Life builds selfish, stupid rules. Morality is one of them, and the sanctity of life is another. These rules are impediments to the great work. If a civilization cannot defend itself, it must be annihilated. If a king cannot hold his power, he must be betrayed. The worth of a thing can be determined only by that thing's ability to exist and to go on existing, and to remake existence to suit its survival. All that would oppose this arbiter is unholy and false. Upon death, Aurix and his sisters will each survive, safe in the Sist universe created by their own might, their throne worlds, so long as they aren't killed in their own throne. This was the sword logic. This is what the Guardians needed to fully understand the hive, what they believe, what their structure is like. Why are they the way they are? And the terrifying realities that the hive are hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, maybe even billions of years old. They utilize the deep to wage war across galaxies. They chased the traveler, destroying whatever world stood in their way. Their love was war, and their worship to the deep was violence, cutting the universe down into a simpler, dominant shape that was themselves. During one of the hive's conflicts, Aurix sought greater power, in which he confronted one of the worm gods and slayed Akka, the worm of secrets. Upon slaughtering Akka, Aurix claimed the secret of calling upon the deep. Just as the hive seem to refer to the traveler in the light as the sky, they tend to refer to the darkness as the deep. Aurix's speech to the deep is not recorded, but it is known that he returned and he said, "Now I am Oryx, the Taken King, and I have the power to take life and make it my own." And with these new abilities, Oryx was unstoppable. The deep would speak to Oryx again, ensuring him that the deep was a place of life, a place of peace, that they ask a simple, true question, and that others call them evil. The deep would express that evil means socially maladaptive, and that they are adaptiveness itself. The fate of everything is made like this, the test of one praxis against another, and it is majestic, majestic. It is the only thing that can be true in and of itself, and it is what I am. So the Hive worship the deep through death and destruction, the sword logic. This is accelerating the universe towards what they call the final shape. It's described as a fire without fuel, burning forever, killing death. It is asking a question that is its own answer, entirely itself. This is what the Hive described to be the final shape, and it is what the Hive aim to become. But the Hive, nor the sword logic, is not the deep itself, not the darkness. We must ask ourselves, perhaps they are to the darkness what guardians are to the light. Are light bearers not paracausal symbiotes themselves? In more recent memory, the fallen Night Stalker Tevis also questioned our unwavering allegiance to the light. To put it as he put it, what's a little xenocide between friends? Ikora notes that the Taken are of the same flower we met in the Black Garden. But no matter the risks, we Guardians ventured deep into Oryx's dreadnought and slaughtered him in his own throne, where even light must obey the sword logic. We use the blighted light kept for sacrifice to burn away the darkness itself. But the Guardians toppled Oryx and did not replace him. They denied what they rightfully earned through the sword logic, the right to be kings and queens of the deep. But perhaps Oryx left the Books of Sorrow for a reason. Perhaps through his history and his knowledge, he lives on through us, through his story. So, the sword logic is not the deep, not the darkness, but it does hint at a vaster, more ancient, more powerful force beneath it. While the Guardians of Humanity fought the Taken War and continued to put down enemies of the city, the Cabal led their own research into these paracausal forces and their proxy armies. Field reports from the Cabal note that Guardians have a counter-attritional drone called a Dead Person, and thus Guardians could only be truly defeated through overwhelming force. Besides their obvious translation errors, well, they're pretty much right. The Cabal also observed that our ghosts, or our drones as they called them, their counter-attritional capabilities, aka their ability to heal us and bring us back to life, were sequestered in certain locations, as if their connection to the light was weaker there. This is the first we know of the Cabal looking into just exactly how to fight us. But the Cabal had paracausal enemies on all sides, and when the Dreadnought entered Sol, the Skyburners Legion crashed a command ship through its hull, creating a beachhead for their war effort, and a convenient transmat incursion point for us Guardians. The Skyburners used this opportunity to research the Hive's technological capabilities, especially the mechanisms by which light can be suppressed, consumed, and even contained. Word from the front was transmitted to the Emperor at once, and soon the Dominus would arrive. The Cabal were no warriors of the sword logic, but they would come to strangle the light all the same. I am the last speaker, and I dream the Traveler will leave us. It shouldn't be a surprise. This truth has been passed down from speaker to speaker for generations. The Traveler is good. The Traveler is sentient. The Traveler will save us. And the Traveler will leave us. I stopped preaching that final tenet. It only served to frighten people. I lie through my teeth and tell them to trust in the Traveler. The dreams continue. The headaches get worse. But I believe so strongly that this knowledge will destroy our way of life, and I hold it so tightly that it poisons me. It's all for nothing. I'm in my apartment when I hear the first ground-shaking explosion, and I go outside to see what's happened. I see the Red Legion fleet darkening our skies, and I realize I have made a terrible mistake. To understand the darkness, of course, we have to understand the light, and we cannot forget the time the city was brought to its knees. The Traveler was caged, the light was blocked, and the city was defeated. A vision from the Traveler granted to one Guardian beckoned them to a shard of the Traveler left in the collapse. The Red Legion planned to capture, manipulate, and bestow the Traveler's light on themselves. Gaul became infatuated with the prospect of being worthy, and Zavala's faith in the traveler was collapsing. Ikora's knowledge was fundamentally challenged. I still remember her disbelief on Io. Could the light be contained? Manipulated? Like any other weapon? Was it really not so special? When Gaul was confronted and defeated by the one guardian with their light, extracted light burst from his defeated body, and he proclaimed himself a god. The traveler saw him and spoke. Freedom is a chain. Choice is a prison. You see him, and all he wishes for is confirmation of that fact. But to do so would invoke something far worse than justification. You can feel his hand reaching inside of you, grasping for your heart and tearing it free for himself. You know the pain he will cause. In one last act of defiance, you break your shackles, exerting the strength you had been slowly gathering all this time. Physical chains break, but chains of causality are not so fragile, even for you. You see him, and he is satisfied. Then, he is gone. Your roar of defiance echoes into the infinite. You know they will witness. It is only a matter of time. The light lives in all places and all things. So the traveler was alive, acting for the first time since the collapse, and the Guardians went to work quickly, engaging in the Red War to help reclaim Sol from the Red Legion. The effects of the Traveler's awakening would cascade across the system, stirring up a worm god who had immigrated to Mars. Upon defeat with the aid of the Warmind Rasputin, Zol, the Will of Thousands, perished, but was not destroyed. To the Hive and their worm gods, death is a road, death is a metamorphosis, the unsacred union between destroyer and destroyed. The might which defeats a god is also the ambrosia that god craves. The meat-sweet logic of existence asserted by violence, the binomial decision between two ways of being which deny each other. In dying, Zol fed richly. Zol wanted the sword proof, the single proof. It wanted to become a rule which divided the mighty living from the mighty dead. So it worshipped the anthem anathema, the temptation to dominate the objective universe with the subjective will. It said, I shall be an engine to make your desire hegemon over your conditions. It said, wield me and use me to test your foe. This was its worship. Ayat. This was our first understanding of what the darkness is, and perhaps is still the most pure understanding of this sort of paracausal belief associated with the darkness, the sword logic. The desire to rid the universe of everything but yourself so that you may become the perfect final shape. We must be steadfast in our understanding about the darkness and the sword logic here, as even a paracausal logic based on simplicity through death has various methods of being achieved, as we can see with Zol. But these all become worship of the deep. I will once again reference Ulantan when he said, to have light, we must have dark. This is the symmetry of the universe. I propose a simple experiment. Look around. You see light, you see darkness. There cannot be one without the other. They are two sides of the same coin. If it is true for these Newtonian echoes, why would it not be true of the purest paracausal forms? Therefore, I conclude, the reason you persecute me is not because of the symmetry. It's because of the truth beyond this truth. The truth which most of you dread. If we could destroy the darkness, but we had to give up our light to do so, how many of us would make that trade? The demiurge of the Hive is the worm. The demiurge of the Vex is the thought. The demiurge of the Fallen is the ether, which is survival. The demiurge of the Cabal is authority. These are the things, both constraint and power, which define the universe of possible outcomes. These are the rule makers and instruments which enforce reality. Now give a power to a guardian, and they shall know that power as a weapon. For when a guardian chooses to alter the world, they do so with the bullet and the blade. Grant a guardian godly power, and that guardian shall fashion it into a perfect rifle. The demiurge of the guardian is the gun. But we must remember that the demiurge is not the god. It is only the thing that converts perfect divine will into imperfect material form. We may wield the demiurge, but if we do, what god wields us? This question, or maybe even proposition, has long haunted lightbearers such as myself. Do we truly make our own fate? Were we just sucked into being a proxy army, a last resort for a silent god? The allure of the power of the darkness, specifically the sword logic of the Hive, infatuated Toland. This is the power that transformed Rezyl Azzir into Dredgen Yor, whom's legend garnered a band of followers, a band of shadows. Free of the shackles of morality, the shadows were free to live by the laws of adaptation, of pursuit of power and knowledge at any cost, and in their view, this was evolution. In freeing themselves from one logic, they shackled themselves to another. Perhaps freedom is relative to the length of a chain. Speaking of Yor in the shadows, some speak of a rogue that hides amongst these shadows, a gunslinger whose light burns away the dark and keeps the Dredgens at bay. But don't worry, we'll get to that. Our next foray into the darkness starts with the war in the Reef. A long con of the Witch Queen used the Guardians as pawns to unleash a dark secret of the Awoken, the last Ahamkara, Riven. The Guardians' actions would send the Dreaming City into a death spiral, the light-bearing masses learning about the Awoken's history almost too late. This, of course, came in the wake of Kate's death, in the pursuit of vengeance against Uldren Sov. The Awoken's history starts with the collapse. Light and darkness collided in the asteroid belt, resulting in enough energy to create a singularity that an Exodus ship attempting to escape was sucked into. It was there a pocket universe formed from the union of two paracausal forces, and the humans trapped in the singularity found refuge. Mara Sov had a domineering will, and without her, the Awoken would have never come into being. Time flowed faster in this singularity, much faster than it did in the parent universe, our universe. This singularity was called the Distributary. In the Distributary, all Awoken were immortal, and Mara Sov led the willing out of their pocket universe into their parent universe to defeat the heralds of our collapse. We don't have enough time to get into the exact details of the creation of the Awoken, but their story is integral to understanding the balance between light and dark and what Mara Sov and the rest of the Awoken have come to play in this war. Upon arriving in our universe, the Awoken realized they had weak acausal senses and a sensibility towards the paracausal forces of light and dark. They seemed to have an inherent connection to these forces, and it allowed them to have great insight towards them. This excerpt comes from an Awoken text, where the logics of the light and the dark are reflected upon. There is a war, and its name is existence. There are two ways to fight. One is the sword, and one is the bomb. This way is known to those who study the cosmos. Take any part of it at any time, and you will see an edge and say, this is a weapon. By the bomb, I mean that way of being that is complex and schematic, and that must attain a criticality to attack. The way that is made from new things, and that triumphs by the arrangement of intricacy. This way is known to those who study themselves. Take any component of the bomb in isolation, and you will say, what is this? I cannot understand its purpose. Yet in it is the possibility of a fire. A sword can be part of a bomb if the sword strike is the detonation mechanism. It's impossible for a cellular automata game to change its own rules, but it is possible to create sub-games with their own rules, and for those sub-games to yield advantage in the master game. There are many ways to godhood. One way is to kill all that is killable, so all that remains must be immortal. One of these ways is closer to the sword, and one is closer to the bomb. If the bomb can defeat the sword by the standard of the sword, then the bomb has claimed primacy. A sword is everywhere edged, but the pieces of a bomb do not look at all like weapons until they are assembled. We can obviously relate the sword logic to the sword mentioned in this Awoken text, and the bomb to the light, this pursuit of complexity. While the sword reduces to simplicity, the bomb requires complex machinations to assemble itself and to ultimately detonate, destroying the sword. This description of using a sword strike to detonate a complex strategy, a bomb logic, is exactly what Morozov did at the Battle of Saturn. Morozov's goal from the moment the Awoken were born in the Distributary was to lead her people back into our universe to confront the darkness. She created the initial conditions that led to this event happening. This was something she kept secret, and those few who knew gasped in terror, as Mara was responsible for any suffering, any death and despair that had come in the Distributary, because she could have prevented it. The Queen of the Reef keeps her secrets, and her ultimate goal is unknown to all but herself. But in keeping secret, she wages a war of existence from the position of complexity, from the logic of the bomb. Mara would learn more of the sword logic and its herald Oryx the Taken King from Eris Morn, and would devise a plan. Mara would learn more of the sword logic and its herald Oryx the Taken King from Eris Morn, and would devise a plan. She would sacrifice herself and her entire fleet in order to access Oryx's throne world. And when the Guardians killed the Taken King, but denied his throne, Mara would take that power for herself. But in connecting Oryx's throne world to the one she constructed with Riven and her wish magic, so too did Oryx reach into Mara's Ascendant Realm, decimating it and opening it to the Hive and the Taken. Now, with the power of light and dark, the Guardians opened the Dreaming City's gates. The Queen commanded the destruction of Riven. But Riven had been taken by Oryx, and since Oryx's death, has been under the control of another queen, described as a secretive sister, Savathun. The Guardians desired to kill Riven, and Riven used this power as a metamorphosis, granting one last wish. Doing this, she laid a curse upon the Dreaming City. It was a trap. Just as Mara used the logic of the bomb to anticipate Oryx destroying her and possibly allowing her to take his power after he had been killed, Savathun used that same logic against Mara. She used Riven to bait Uldren into unlocking the Dreaming City, leading the Guardians in, and ultimately knowing that the Guardians could not resist wanting to kill the dragon at its heart. Using that power of 6 Guardians desiring to kill the dragon, Riven laid the Dreaming City curse upon the city. Using the huge amount of paracausal energy granted by 6 Guardians desiring to kill her, Riven started the Dreaming City cycle. This started with the Guardians fighting beside the Awoken week after week, defeating a daughter of Savathun, Dol Ankaru. But every time this happened, after 3 weeks, the Dreaming City would reset. It was caught in a time loop, believed to be concocted by Curia, a Taken Vex, Dol Ankaru, Savathun, and empowered by Riven's last wish. Us Guardians, being paracausal, weren't susceptible. Our light was a power superordinate to material physics. And the Awoken, well, they would always return. Their weak acausality providing them the awareness of their predicament, but there was no end in sight. In one foul swoop, using both the logic of the sword and the bomb, Savathun had neutralized the power of the Dreaming City, the majority of the Awoken forces, and created an engine to give her tribute, all hailing to her cunning. This was not all woe, however. Excursions in the Dreaming City gave us much knowledge about our foe, though it was convoluted, complex, and pluripotent. In other words, it was complicated as hell. But it revealed key points about the powers being wielded against us. They were based upon deception, called Imbaru, which the Witch Queen directly fed on. The wish dragons themselves feed on the space between subjective desire and objective reality, utilizing the anthem anathema to convert subjective will into objective desire, just as the human body breaks down matter for fuel. It was even suggested the Ahamkara and the Hive Worm gods inhabit a similar ecological niche, using the same syntax of O blank mine as a method of subordination, both species having evolved to exploit this independently, just as how many species independently evolved to have eyes. While this information comes from obviously dubious sources within the Dreaming City, we really cannot deny that there is some sort of obvious truth to this. It seems that even in paracausality, we all bow down to Darwin. But still, research is done, and other records from the Reef and beyond have confirmed a lot of these basic facts as having merit. It seems that the Witch Queen's lies are bolstered by truths. The Queen of the Reef revealed to us that she played the game of light and dark for everyone's benefit, whether we knew it or not. And from all of this, we saw the scorn arise from Uldren's desire, having their ether corrupted by darkness. These were Eliksni no more, but an undead army at the bidding of powers beyond.
When there is too much darkness in the universe, light must cast it away. And when there is too much light, darkness must drown it out. This truth is our burden. This is what it is to be awoken. I dreamt of a friend I will come to have. She will tell me a side should always be taken, even if it's the wrong side. I think I should like her. The next act is about to begin, and I do not know when I will return. Fear nothing. Bow to no one. We will meet again. One day.
As much as chaos enveloped Sol, especially in the Reef, the Guardians would continue with forays into the darkness. This was a time of exploration. They would utilize the Drifters' gambit to show their power and manipulate the Taken themselves with motes of darkness. The Vanguard kept a close eye on the Drifter, and a Praxic investigation was launched against the Drifter and the Guardian themselves from suspected foul play against the Vanguard. The Warlock's Praxic Order holds a firm stance against any use of darkness, with the belief that understanding it was dangerous and could only lead to corruption, and we must focus on fighting it instead. These ideas and beliefs are certainly familiar territory, and they are held by many Guardians and citizens alike. The Praxic Warlock Anor was one of Ikora's hidden, and personally led the investigation, though the Vanguard ultimately decided to keep Drifter at arm's length in order to maintain an eye on him. Even the Vanguard couldn't deny the usefulness of what the Drifters' games seemed to bring to the tower in terms of power and understanding, even if it was inherently dangerous. The Guardian would use this excursion to communicate with the powers of the Nine, which turned out to be sentient dark matter whose existence depended on life's existence, specifically the life in Sol. It was them helping the Drifter harness darkness, preparing this lowly survivor for the battles yet to come. The Nine, or rather, certain entities within the Nine, have had influences across Sol's recent history. They were the ones that let Skolas loose after Marasov gifted him to them as a peace offering, leading to the House of Wolves uprising. Some of the Nine helped influence Varix to release the Barons from the Prison of Elders. Some assisted Gaul in his advancement on Earth. Some utilized interdimensional gates to try their hand at making chemical life, and provide Guardians with valuable wares. And some gifted the Drifter a pocket dimension to control Taken that he towed behind his derelict. The true goal of all this? Not even the Drifter himself knew. But he did know one thing. Using the darkness was necessary for survival. All of this information is extremely important to understand how us Guardians came to know the darkness, and the levels of knowledge we've gained over the years to understand what exactly we're fighting. Now, back to Drifter. He had run in with some notorious bunches, went by many names, somehow ended up on an ice planet outside of Sol that was crawling with darkness entities that suppressed the light itself, but all of this had been recent. The Nine were guiding him towards something. Now, the Guardian uncovered relics of the Dark Age, the fabled last word, gifted to them after being observed by the man with the golden gun himself, Shin Malphur. The notorious renegade watched from afar as he had for countless years after his fabled showdown at Dwindler's Ridge. He had a history of delivering strict frontier justice to anyone who embraced the corruption of the Hive's darkness, specifically the Shadows of Yore. As the Guardian worked with the Drifter, they would craft the Malfeasance for defense against the violent noble, and a weapon of sorrow, a thorn, though this was a replica of the original, often wielded by the Shadows. Drifter, using the darkness, was afraid of Malphur, as he incinerated anyone who would be corrupted by the dark. But through tests, careful observation, and the sacrifices of himself and his friends, Shin Malphur transcended the legendary showdown of Dwindler's Ridge that defined the never-ending war of the Holy Light versus the corrupting Dark. Shin realized that Yor never drew his gun, but wanted to tempt Shin to embrace the powers of the darkness, not out of maliciousness, but to lead Shin to a truth that Rezyl Azzir was too foolhardy to control. And Shin Malphur's plan was to utilize Drifter's gambit to embrace it. The gambit paid off, in more ways than one. The Guardians who joined in the Drifter's games have proven to be the perfect guinea pigs to demonstrate a larger point. The shadows of dark power that tempt us are not inherently evil. In fact, they are simply another tool to be used if we hope to bend the unknown to our will. An impossible feat we must learn to master if we wish to push back the ever-aggressive tide of extinction. Azzir knew this long ago. Azzir knew this long ago, long before anyone else. He saw the path forward. He simply didn't understand it. His courage and strength clouded the dangers of the path he tread, the path we now walk. The difference being, we have Azzir's folly to guide us. We can, and have, learned from his mistakes. That some level of deceit was needed to further my goal of seeing Azzir's path to the end is unfortunate, but necessary. The stage set by the foul sport the Drifter has crafted has given many Guardians the confidence they need to see the shadows for what they are without losing their way or tainting their light. This was Azzir's gravest mistake. He plunged freely into the abyss, thinking his will alone could fend off the whispers and the corruption. But alone we fall. Only together can we thrive in light and dark. This continuation and revelations about Shin Malphur's story are a direct subversion to the legend of the man with the golden gun against the Dredgen Yor, the tale of revenge where a hero of the light outdrew a menace of the dark and put him down in holy fire. No, Shin saw something in his experience, something that no one else did. He saw the gray between the black and the white. He understood that Rezyl was much more complex of a man than anyone ever thought. And he saw a future that was needed, a future where light and dark were needed to be used in order to save humanity. This direct subversion in a lot of ways mirrors us Guardians' journey with the darkness, where we started with the idea of destroying the darkness with the light, but came to realize just how nuanced this war of light and dark really is. Now, Shin saw something in us, the Guardians, and confided in us the truth. Shin did not just hunt the Shadows of Yore, he was one of the founding members. Zyre Orsa, Dredgen Vale, that was him. The only path forward in fighting the darkness was to use it, to embrace and learn about it, and to forsake past dogma of absolutes. But there was a danger. There were those that would be tempted by the darkness, and they had to be identified and culled. To do this, he would use Gambit in the Shadows of Yore to bait them out. Shin sacrificed friends, his life, his inspiring legend, to do what needed to be done. Those guardians who would give freely of themselves and seek not only power in the shadows, but comfort, purpose. They have been drawn out and addressed, some with force, and sadly, an end. My life has always been about absolutes. There is light and there is dark, and I made my purpose to defend against the whispered corruption of the shadows calling. I've seen no middle ground, though maybe I've always known it exists. I've always seen many heroes tempt that sinister fate, and the dire consequences born of their ignorance, pride, selfishness. I've put many down, more than anyone knows, more than I'll ever confess. But seeing you, watching you, I don't feel I was wrong in my actions. But I now know I was wrong in my core assumption, my core belief. To me, there was only ever white and black, good and evil. In you, I see blinding light. I see a hero among heroes. I see the hope you inspire shining through. But I also see, for the first time, maybe, just maybe, a little bit of gray. And with it, an end to last rites and final words. S. And with the start of this new chapter, the Guardian recovered the original thorn, cleansed it, and created a new beacon of light, the Lumina. So the man with the golden gun saw within us a blinding light and a touch of gray, foreshadowing not only what was to come, but also our fundamental understanding of light and darkness. We need to switch gears onto Emperor Callus, as he reached out to the Guardians once again to offer the bounties of his Leviathan. Well, that wasn't strange, that had happened before. But this time, he made a grave mistake. Emperor Callus had recovered a Hive artifact, the Crown of Sorrow, and in all his infinite wisdom and glory, he decided to put it on a Cabal specimen that was bred specifically to wear the crown. Emperor Callus even knew that this was a trick from Savathun meant for him, but Callus went ahead with the plan anyway. Gowron's mind, this poor Cabal, was instantly taken over by the Witch Queen, and her forces began wreaking havoc on the Leviathan. The Guardians, of course, could not resist powerful gear, and within the halls of his menagerie, Callus extended his ultimate hand of friendship. He wanted Guardians to become his shadows. After Callus was banished from Torobatl, capital of the Cabal Empire, by the militaristic revolutionaries, led in part by Gaul and Callus's own daughter, the Princess Imperial Keitel, Callus was a broken shell of his former, self-proclaimed glorious self. Callus reasoned that they did not kill him because he was still beloved by much of his people. This was maybe a refusal to acknowledge mercy from his estranged daughter, and in his exile, the broken navigation system of the Leviathan brought the Emperor and his loyalists to an edge in space, a black edge onto nothing. It was there. Callus stared into the abyss, and it stared back. Callus notes that it was not nothing, but a nothing, and in it he saw the end of all things. After this, Callus was changed fundamentally. He was reinvigorated with optimism, hedonism, with purpose. Callus would collect the strongest of all races he encountered, claiming some for his menagerie and his enjoyment, and declare the zenith of their kind a shadow of Callus. These shadows would be great warriors. They would deliver upon his every word, for all of the universe was to be enjoyed in the fleeting days to come, and they would be there, by his side, at the end, for Callus reserved the right to be last. So far, this newfound exploration of the darkness post-Cade's death seems to be vague and abstract. We see familiarity in it. We see the Witch Queen and the Hive enacting her schemes. We see talks about swords and bombs. We also are reminded tales of the familiar sword logic corrupting Rezul Azir, creating Dredgen Yor. But right after, we see a direct subversion of that, a realization that there is more knowledge to be gained from the relationship between light and dark. We also see a bit more rounding to Calus's story. We knew he was banished and that he stared into the abyss, but the fact that Calus described what he encountered as a capital N nothing is weird. Is this the darkness? Are these the pyramid ships hinted at in dreams and visions? We just don't know. After the Guardians were done in the Leviathan, Hive began to stir on Luna. Whispers of the Witch Queen ignited Crota's brood into a frenzy, giving them cravings of power, aspirations of renewal, and amongst them, the grim understanding that without Crota and without Oryx, what was their right to existence? What power did they hold? This brood of the Hive was left on this rock to die, so something had to be done. The sword logic demanded it. Hashladun, the daughter of Crota, would find a new champion to lead them, and they would prove themselves in the fighting pits. But this tried and true method of the sword logic would fail. The pits only produced failures unworthy of existence. So if traditional rites of the sword logic could not deliver strength to Crota's brood, then a subversion had to be made of the logic. And if the subversion produced strength, then would that not fulfill the logic of the sword? Somewhere in a shadowed realm, the Whisper Queen smiles as she ponders death. She has gifted the Swarm a weapon of beautiful, perfect destruction, and a mighty champion, the means to move beyond their pathetic adherence to a sword logic beyond their grasp. The daughters will see these gifts as a boon, a rising tide to lift the Swarm and challenge the light. But a grander design is at play. The bloodline of Oryx has run its course. The luminous conquerors will come once more, they, the bringers of death. In the final, desperate gasp of a dead king's legacy will serve as an anvil upon which a new sword will be hammered, strengthened, and forged for wars yet to come. The purest extension of the logic's intent. Here we see Savathun working in the shadows, herself realizing that pure faith in the sword logic needed to be broken. This understanding was passed down to Crota's brood, and when Zolmak was born, he was bound to everlasting death in the pit of heresy, where he would be resurrected again and again in order to fulfill the dying brood's desire for power. But truly, Savathun had purposely doomed the bloodline of her brother. She no longer believed in absolutes, as they could all so easily be broken. Time can be bent and broken, redirected to the whims of those with the knowledge and the will. Space can be shredded asunder, excavated to discover new and ancient realms not chained to understanding. Death can be ignored through impossible energies and advanced technologies both physical and indistinguishable from magic. But ignorance is the unconquerable constant. One can learn more, but none can learn all. When the final absolute falls, reality will shudder and blink, and a new absolute will emerge, an ending, total and complete. You wish to see that end? I wish to ensure it does not come to pass. Another harrowing instance of the sword logic not being absolute, written in Hive Apocrypha itself. This was somehow tied to something beyond the Hive's knowledge, the deep, the darkness, the nothing Calus found. But the darkness was not done making its presence known on Luna. A pyramid, seen before in glimpses of the far reaches of space, visions without context, the warning of a second collapse, was here beneath Luna's surface all along.
Should be right around here. That's one of those pyramids. It can't be. That should not be here.
Hive had known of its existence. Perhaps Toland did too, all those years ago. But now, it is awakened, granting power to the Hive, recreating the traumas of our past, as if it was expecting us. The Hidden Swarm saw the Pyramid's power as not one of pure death, but of creation, further fueling their heresies in search for power. Toland would speak of the Pyramid feeding off our light, our living essence, to manifest these nightmares. But in the end, the Pyramid opens its doors to us and offered none other than salvation.
We are not your friend. We are not your enemy. We are your salvation.
The coming year would involve several military excursions by the Vanguard. First was against the Vex in the Black Garden, pulling the Undying Mind from every timeline and destroying it, combating the Soul Divisive, the Vex who worship the darkness, and fundamentally altering the course of time. With the Undying Mind annihilated across space-time, the Vex no longer predicted their own victory over light and darkness. They predicted the end of all things upon the arrival of the Pyramids. Osiris saw this horrible fate firsthand in the Infinite Forest, a world encompassed by darkness, and a monolithic pyramid floating above the ruins of the last city. It is worth noting that this was not the first time the Vex were wrong. Upon Oryx's arrival, the Vex predicted Oryx's victory over us, the Vex, and the entire system. But nevertheless, we know that they were wrong in the end. Praedyth line, Vex were fallible. Omens of the incoming fleet haunted the Guardians as they warred across broken time on Mercury, combating a Scion-led Red Legion contingency to rewrite the past, using a device Osiris built to save a fallen hero, his comrade, his brother, his lover, Saint 14. I mention this because there are no official reports describing exactly how the sundial functions, but word circulates around the Drifter about it. Something about whispers. Whether that can be referring to Ahamkara or relics of the darkness, we're really unsure. The Guardians fought back against the Red Legion, stabilized the timeline around Sol, and the Guardian led an excursion into the corridors of time, venturing into the past, saving Saint 14 from the House of Rain, and from his ultimate demise in the Infinite Forest. But the Guardian found one more portent of calamity, the Guardian's own grave. This brings up a fundamental question. Do Guardians really make their own fate? Or are we just destined to die like everything else? The Scions had one more trick up their sleeve. If the Red Legion couldn't have the Traveler, no one could. They were going to crash their disabled superweapon into the last city. The Vanguard had one hope: power up Rasputin, get enough firepower into the air, and incinerate the superweapon before it wipes us out. It was a success, thank the Traveler. Or I guess, thank Rasputin. But the harbinger of the second collapse was on our doorsteps.
Anna insists you understand the stakes. Convince me. Our enemy reveals itself. The shadow is long and close. Is this what's had your attention? Preparations to fight? To rebuild? To run?
Mayday! 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 This is NFV Naratursa 16. 11,000 souls in cryo-sleep aboard. We are a few minutes out of New Pacific Arcology. We were struck by debris in a large wave. Fusion plant offline. We can see extensive, catastrophic damage to one of the Arcology domes. Oh, it's gone over. Respond if able.
Mayday! 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 This is New Pacific Arcology on guard, declaring a sundown loss of habitability event. We have 2.9 million souls aboard. We repeat, Titan is no longer safe for human life.
The collapse. You were there. You gave everything to a cause and saw it all swept away. You're afraid to fail. Again. So am I. I've never considered how it must have felt to live through the collapse. From this day, we speak as allies, not warriors who seek to wield each other as weapons. After we break the Almighty, the city will devote whatever resources you need towards banishing these dark omens. When they come, we will stand together, as equals, as guardians.
If humanity was to survive, they would need the power of the Warmind and all the esoteric knowledge of their ancient foe that they could muster. We're gonna step back a few months here. Following the initial foray into the Lunar Pyramid, the Guardian uncovered a relic in which messages were transmitted seemingly from the darkness itself. A great quote-unquote unveiling. The content of the messages would fall under intense study by both Eris Morn and the wider Guardian academic community, as the implications put forth by the unveiling had fundamental ripples across all disciplines of metaphysics, philosophy, and even our own morality. Yet still, the words inscribed henceforth could not be ignored, only studied and attempted to be understood. The text of the unveiling presented itself as a self-described allegory, set in a garden that existed before time in the universe itself. Here existed a gardener and a winnower, the conceptual and ontological manifestations of complexity and simplicity. They would play a game of cellular automata, a game with simple rules of growth, reproduction, life, and death, presented similar to a pre-Golden Age mathematician's own display of complexity arising from simple rules. While the quote-unquote game actually played by these ontological beings was too complex for the mind to comprehend, the allegory laid out had plain implications. This game of life was extremely sensitive to initial conditions, and while the game functioned via relatively simple rules of life and death, corresponding to the gardener and the winnower, the results of the game were almost unfathomably complex and impossible to predict. Almost. Each time the gardener and the winnower played their game of possibilities, one pattern would always emerge. In their game, the gardener and the winnower discovered shapes of possibility. They foresaw bodies and civilizations, minds and cognitions, qualia and suffering. They learned the rules that governed which patterns would flourish in the game and which would dwindle. They learned those rules because they were those rules. And in time, the gardener became vexed. "It always ends the same," the gardener complained. "This one stupid pattern." "They're majestic," I said. "They have no purpose except to subsume all other purposes. There is nothing at the center of them except the will to go on existing, to alter the game to suit their existence. They spare not one sliver of their totality for any other work. They are the end." The gardener got up and brushed their knees. "Every game we play, this one pattern consumes all the others, wipes out every interesting development. A stupid, boring exploit that cuts off entire possibility spaces from ever arising. There's so much that we'll never get to see because of this pest." They chewed at their cracked lip, which existed only because this is an allegory. "I'm going to do something about it," they said. "We need a new rule. A special new rule, something to..." The gardener threw up their hands in exasperation. "I don't know. To reward those who make space for new complexity. A power that helps those who make strength from heterodoxy, and who steer the game away from gridlock. Something to ensure there's always someone building something new. It'll have to be separate from the rest of the rules, running in parallel so it can't be compromised. And we'll have to be very careful, so it doesn't disrupt the whole game. All you will do," I said, with rising panic and fury, "is delay the dominant pattern that will overrun the others. It is inevitable. One final shape No, it'll be different. Everything will be different. Everywhere you look, everything will be the same. Your new rule will only make great false cysts of horror full of things that should not exist, that cannot withstand existence, that will suffer and scream as the rich blisters fill with effluent and rot around them, and when they pop, they will blight the whole garden. Whatever exists because it must exist and because it permits no other way of existence has the absolute claim to existence. That is the only law. No, the gardener said. I am the growth and preservation of complexity. I will make myself into a law in the game. And thus we too became parts of the game. And the laws of the game became gnomic and open to change by our influence. And I had only one purpose and one principle in the game, and I could do nothing but continue to enact that purpose, because it was all that I was and ever would be. I looked at the gardener, I looked at my hands, I discovered the first knife. We wrestled in the garden, in the loam of possibility where nothing existed and everything might. A shadowed agony among the flowers. In the wet pop of grapes and the smear of berries, in the perturbation of the field that was the garden before the first tick of time and the first point of space, were the detonations that made the universes. Each universe was pregnant with its own inflationary volumes and braided with ever-ramifying timelines. Each volume cooling and separating into domains of post-symmetric physics, all of which were incarnations of that great and all-dictating bipartite law that states only, exist, lest you fail to exist. And still, we fought. We brought down the tree of silver wings and left the stump to smoke amid the meadows. We left prints of our splayed feet and our straining backs in the clay. And I won. I won because the gardener always stops to offer peace. And when they do, I always strike. But by then, it didn't matter. The game was over. The garden had given birth to creation. The rules were in place, and there would never be a second chance. We played in the cosmos now. We played for everything. And the patterns in the flowers, terrified by our contention, were no longer the inevitable victors of a game whose rules had suddenly changed. And they passed into the newborn cosmos to escape us. It was the gardener that chose you from the dead. I wouldn't have done that. It's just not in me. But now that they have invested themselves in you, you are incredibly, uniquely special. That wandering refugee chose to make a stand, spend their power to say, here I prove myself right. Here I wager that, given power over physics and the trust of absolute freedom, people will choose to build and protect a gentle kingdom ringed in spears, and not fall to temptation, and not surrender to division, and never yield to the cynicism that says, everyone else is so good that I can afford to be a little evil. The gardener is all in. They are playing for keeps, and they are wrong. Or, so I argue, for after all, the universe is undecidable. There is no destiny. We're all making this up as we go along. Neither the gardener nor I know for certain that we're eternally, universally right, but we can be nothing except what we are. You have a choice. You are the gardener's final argument. It would mean everything if I could convince you that I am the right and only way. I truly value you. To the gardener, you are a means to an end. To me, you are majestic. Majestic. You are full of the only thing worth anything at all. I am, by the only standard that matters or will ever matter, the winning team. Existence is a test that most will fail. Would you not count yourself among the victorious few? Don't hurry to deliver your answer. I'll come over and hear it myself. This allegory was presented plainly and clearly directed at the Guardians themselves. It preached a philosophy close to the sword logic. But the ultimate question of this allegory is, how real is this? While we could take it as just an allegory, and it's really tempting to do so, one cannot deny the truth of some of the things that it's conveying. It talks of a garden, a great tree of silver wings. It talks of a pattern that vexed the gardener, a pattern that subsumes everything it encounters, and that are the ultimate victors of the universe. And finally, the winnower, from which we are being narrated by, and the gardener are said to be gnomic within the game, quote-unquote, aka our universe. Perhaps the gardener and the winnower are exact forces. Perhaps the gardener and the winnower are individuals that exist. Perhaps the gardener and the winnower are just personifications of the forces of light and dark, running in parallel to the causal nature of our universe. It would certainly make sense that way, as the forces of light and dark being paracausal allows their wielders to quote-unquote change the rules of the causal game of the universe. And that's what we know to be the only way the Vex could ever be defeated, by paracausal powers. We also can't deny that the Black Garden has been studied to be an ontology, in that while it is adrift outside of time and space, it is very, very real. Nevertheless, it ends by saying that we are the gardeners, the lights, the travelers' final argument, and that we have the ability to choose our destiny. Eris wrote us a letter at the end of the unveiling, one that I will read in part here. Friend, it has become fashionable lately to analyze light and darkness as if they were political opponents, each with something to offer us. Some guardians even take secret names to mark their transgressions. I despise this flirtation, but I cannot speak against it. After all, I have had to find my own pathways to power. Thus, I asked my queen, who has preached the doctrine of balance, if she truly believed in the equal worth of light and dark. All that said, she told me, I believe in balance, but to seek balance is not to seek equity. A sea half of water and half of poison is not in balance. A body half alive and half dead is not in balance. Given the choice to live in any world at all, we would need a little darkness in it, I think, to keep the balance true, but not so much as we would need the light. I think a world of balance would fight the darkness, because darkness unchecked is darkness thriving. I think that a world of balance would never mistake the excitement of transgression or the grim necessity of trespass for a genuinely righteous act. We must remember the value of unshakable, irrational hope. The choice to act as if we lived in a better world can create a place for that better world to exist. It is a sign of self-respect, Ariana always said, to fearlessly question our deepest beliefs. But it will always be rank foolishness to leap into a vat of plutonium salt and call it self-exploration. And to tempt your friends into that vat with you, that is evil. Thank you for being so worthy of my trust. Thank you for carrying my hope, Eris. Unveiling ends as an undeniable explanation of the ontological Black Garden that exists adrift in time and space, and the vexing pattern that emerged, the undeniable victors of the universe, only curtailed by a disastrous bet brought on by the gardener. But this was just the beginning of the arrival, a portent of the end.
It's been a while, old man. The tower looks at you and sees a god. But I see a thug, a murderer, betrayer. You know why I left the Infinite Forest, what I saw. A line has been drawn in this system. Light on one side, dark on the other. Where do you stand?
Rasputin would give coordinates to Osiris, leading him to the edge of the heliopause where he confronted a darkness anomaly, recovering a seed of silver wings, and a message from Mara, plant the seed. Now a copy of the eternal tree of growth and depth in the never-ceasing garden before time, toppled by the gardener and winnower within this spatial anthology, this now grows in the effigy of Shartar's labyrinth, where the traveler itself last graced Io. Its branches integrate whatever paracausal energy they interact with. The light and dark vie for dominance within the tree itself. I'd like to pause for a moment and read you a passage that comes with the Mark 44 stand-asides, originally found before the tower fell to the Red Legion and recovered again shortly during the Red War. The tree in the garden with silver wings. The air around it is oppressive and inspires violence in those who even breathe a little in. Shards of the disastrous bark peel from it and litter the ground, and nothing grows in its shadow. It scintillates faintly at dusk. It has achieved its entelechy with every body falling, every civilization laid to waste, every leaf forged into instruments of ruin. The gardener is hard to bother. She is constantly amidst her weeds, kneeling in the tangent dust, gloves covered in a mix of distant soils and metallic saps. She is listening to the music of the insects amidst the flowers, the unguent as it begins to drip from the ferns, the slight scratch of the worm beneath, and not to you, and certainly not to your cries for help. Perhaps this passage comes from... We don't have time to get into every mention of Silver Wings, or the Black Garden, or the Tree of Silver Wings throughout the Guardian's history, but I recommend you look into it, because if nothing else is clear, this is. The Black Garden has always been a place that proclaimed itself a place of life, but is always apparently a place of the gathering of darkness, of the Vex, of evil so evil it despises other evil. Perhaps that's just all our point of view. And from the point of view of the darkness, of the winnower, of the hive, of the Vex, of anything that worships the dark, all other life is evil in its falseness, in its inability to survive. Its existence is a plague upon the universe, and its constant creation by the gardener is the most evil thing a being could ever do. But I digress. This was the time. The darkness itself was reaching out, and we must reach back. And in that moment of absolution, of contact, Savathun ripped us out. For the following months, Savathun would interfere with our communication with the darkness. But Eris devoted herself to the work. Drifter utilized his gambit tech to help contain the darkness spreading into the planets the pyramid scales landed on, as well as providing a paracausal energy bank to charge the Seed of Silver Wings, used in turn to break through Savathun's interference. Eris's focus on the matter was razor sharp. Here are some chosen excerpts from Eris's many decipherings of contact with the pyramids. The enemy continues to suggest that we must abandon the Traveler. This is a good sign. It would not need to entice us if it could destroy us without effort. We might survive as raiders on the edge. We might abandon our humanity for machines. We might rise up in war and build an empire. Yet none of these can be the answer. Fallen, Vex, Cabal, and Hive all covet the Traveler. They have not left it behind. If all things beyond the Traveler's protection fall under the suzerainty of darkness, not because they serve it, but because they are obedient to its law, then to leave the Traveler would be to join the enemy. There would be no other way. Even so, I am proof otherwise. I move between. There is not only gray between black and white, all the colors are there. Am I not necessary? I would be lost without those who led me back to the light, but if I had not been there to guide them down into darkness, they would all be dead. Who would we become if we were all like Eris Morn? I do not believe the darkness has returned to destroy the Traveler. Surely it could have done that while the Traveler was maimed and stranded. Why wait for a sign that the light had returned to its strength? Perhaps the darkness has returned for us. Guardians are the Traveler's final memorial. We are its selfless legacy and last argument. The enemy implies we are on the edge of a second collapse. There are intimations of a repeated mistake, an error we will make again. Perhaps it is a demand for surrender. The collapse was a murder, a genocide. Why does the enemy imply it was our error? What should we have learned from the collapse? That we are weak, obvious, and false? No. That we made errors in our defense? Our enemy is not a strategy instructor. No. That everything grown must die, hope is futile, etc. Tiresome. Death may be inevitable, but life is worth fighting for to protect and extend. No. That the Traveler is using us for its own ends. Then why would the Traveler sacrifice itself? No. That the darkness is not our enemy. It is only the Traveler's enemy. Does the enemy suggest we should have turned on the Traveler during the collapse? Cracked it like an egg? I see shades of the prisoner's dilemma that occupied Kuang Zhan. If Traveler and humanity cooperate, both suffer. If humanity maims the Traveler as it tries to flee, both are destroyed. But if the Traveler chooses to help us, and we turn against it, offer it to the enemy suggests this would have been our salvation. The enemy presents itself as part of a natural cycle. Like a stalking wolf, it simply obeys its nature. How can we hate it for that? There are jaded guardians, strangers to true loss, who claim that the Traveler has ulterior motives, and the darkness is a natural force. They worship Grey. For them, the line between right and wrong is fine as silk and just as easy to cut. Fools. Evil is real, even in a world of Grey. It must be named and fought, because left unchecked, it takes everything. Those who excuse and deny evil's existence are its greatest allies. Those who mistake its causes for moral justification are its favorite pawns. Yet the pyramid challenges me. Would not the light destroy the darkness, just as darkness would destroy the light? Why do we call a change evil when it is natural and inevitable, like Earth's winters or the sun's spots? Because some changes must be resisted. If we did not prepare for winter, we would die in it. We would cease to exist. So now I find myself using the enemy's philosophy to justify my opposition to the enemy. A neat little trap. Is winter evil? It causes evil. It leads us into evil choices through scarcity and pain. But winter is the result of natural circumstance. Even if it had a mind, it could never choose to become an endless summer. It would always hurt us, simply by being itself. Does that make it evil? And if we were to build shelters and weapons out of ice, would we become evil? Survival in winter requires wintercraft. Survival in darkness requires a new idea of good and evil. One that will not collapse into moral indifference, or we will all be dredgens in the end. It preaches the philosophy of the Books of Sorrow, your scriptures, and the unveiled fragments. The Traveler is a false creator, guarding its creations with false law. We are dead things made in the shape of the dead. The only true law is violent winnowing. Whatever cannot hold on to existence does not deserve existence, and so forth. At least it is consistent. As a student of Hive lore, purity makes me recall the final shape, that which remains when all that can be removed has been removed. But the Hive are a skeletal cult of misery and reduction. The true enemy is rich with nuance. It challenges me. Why does the Traveler strip us of our old identities? As a guardian, I never craved a past. Everything I cared for was in front of me. I could see my people. I could touch them. I could fight for them. But then I lost my ghost in the light. Trapped in the gunpowder tunnels of the disemboweled moon, I cursed the Traveler. It left no childhood memories to comfort me. No parents or cherished friends waiting in the city. No one to whom I could devote my return. Just Ariana, Sai, Omar, and Vel haunting me. Of course, I've never considered this before. There is a more generous interpretation of the Traveler's amnesia. The Traveler believes that if we are freed of our past wounds and fears, given power and a new start, we will choose to be good. We will abandon all lesser causes to defend humanity. We will choose others over ourselves. Perhaps this is why the Traveler never speaks. Its voice is too loud to be anything but coercion. It waits, breathless, for us to make our own choice. Savathun, queen of all encrypts. Savathun, who has distorted these messages so badly that only the tenacious drifter can unscramble them. Why does the Hive trickster want to prevent our contact with her god? Simplest answer, It's all a trick. You did exactly as I required, is her retort to any defeat. But how can her plans be foiled when no one understands what they are? But would she defy the deep itself? Perhaps she would. Savathun's wretched existence is bound to the need to confuse. To understand her is to destroy her. Is she still set on luring us into a black hole? Some newborn universe where she can be a true god? Or was that a lie too? Am I on the verge of some discovery that threatens her? I am convinced that the absolute interdict upon the knowledge of the darkness is misguided. We can understand the enemy without falling under its sway. If I can pass through darkness and return, so can others. Perhaps under my guidance. In these transcripts, Eris is pondering the true nature of the darkness and its relation to the light, especially concerning the various nuance in the philosophies that have been presented as related to the darkness itself. It is consistent in its reduction to simplicity, to culling false life. But what exactly do the pyramids want? Why does Savathun seem to be at odds with whatever the pyramids want, why does Savathun seem to be at odds with it? If the natural order of the universe naturally leads any sort of species or individuals towards the power of the darkness, towards reduction to simplicity, then was there any hope for humanity outside of the Traveler's Light? And where are lines drawn in terms of gaining power and addressing our morality? How do we differentiate between the neutral, natural order of the universe and the moral order that these forces, these individuals, including ourselves, seem to be prescribing to the universe? Drifter had his own means of getting answers. He concocted a plan to ask the Nine a simple question: what is the darkness? And their response? Well, in true Nine fashion, they created a pocket reality, a puzzling interplay of paracausality. As the sun sets on this era of the war of light and darkness, words from the controversial warlock Ulan Tan resonate with never-ending providence. I wish the light could win, as you put it, but we must accept that it's just not that simple. Before the invention of the doctrine of symmetry, the prevailing framework for talking about the darkness was a moral one. Dark Age scholars directly mapped the paracausal forces to our pre-existing moral codes. That is to say, they thought that light equaled good and darkness equaled evil. For them, the connection was innate. Instead, Ulan Tan postulated that our moral understanding of light and darkness were subjective experiences of absolute forces. If one accepts that the concepts of light and darkness and good and evil are not perfectly aligned, it would be the ultimate triumph of moral relativism. And if the dogmatic defense of the light was inherently futile, then Ulan Tan's biggest sin was telling a ruling warrior class that their war was unwinnable.
Don't you see? It is as we once said. In light, there is only weakness, only failure, only death. But where the light takes, the dark gives. No longer will you be a pawn. No longer will you watch the lives of those you care for be lost. Remember, in darkness there is only strength, only victory, only life. Ancient power awaits you on Europa.
Every fire team has returned to the city, even the hunters. They're with the people, keeping them safe. When the last time this happened, the world ended. I'm not worried. I'm not.
It is reforming, healing its wounds. This will not be the end. It will be an escalation.
A distress call rang out across comm channels. Varix, the fugitive, wanted for inciting the riot that killed Cayde 6 and unleashed chaos across the reef, asked for help from a rising faction of Fallen on Europa. Asked for help for anyone, including the Guardians, as a new faction was rising on Europa, the Fallen House Salvation. With relics of the darkness, House Salvation was harnessing a new power, unseen before, stasis. The Guardian rushed in response, only to be intercepted by Eris, Drifter, and the long-lost Stranger, not forgotten. Though hints existed before, the Stranger confirmed her true identity. Elsie Bray, Anna's sister, and granddaughter to the Bray Patriarch, Clovis. She gave the Guardian a splinter of darkness stolen from Varix, who, in turn, stole it from Aramis, the leader of House Salvation. It was up to us to track down her lieutenants and put them down one by one. Out in the icy wastes, the Europan pyramid reached out, empowering us with stasis, allowing us to harness its power through the splinter, but for only short bursts of time. This was our first time wielding the darkness directly, and it was exhilarating. The sheer amount of control you put out into the battlefield, the domineering of your will over those around you, over the movement of atoms themselves until your enemies break and shatter. Elsie would guide us during this excursion, encouraging us to, for the first time, deny the grace of the light and embrace the power of the darkness within. Ghost looked out for us. He, understandably, had his own worries.
This power, this stasis, I'm worried it's taking more of a toll on you than you realize. I'm able to bring you back from death with the light, but I may not be able to if this power consumes you.
When it was time to confront Aramis, the fight pushed us to the brink.
Your chains are showing. All that power, wasted serving false gods. Ha! Allow me to help you break free.
Ghost.
This is... I can't. I'm sorry.
Ha! Look what I've done for you. No more light. No more dark.
Look within. Focus your power.
How interesting.
The only thing we have to break here is you.
Come then, Pawn. Show me what freedom has given you.
House Salvation's leadership was put down for now. But at what cost? At what gain? The Guardian became one of the first Lightbearers to openly wield the dark without falling to its corruption, ushering a new age of power to the Guardians. It's as if Shin Malphur's thesis came true. That little bit of gray shone through in this new power. The darkness reached out, and we reached out and embraced it, without falling to lies, without falling to temptations, to the whispers, though the whispers that promised individual power permeate everything around the Europan pyramid, including the ziggurat in which we enhance our darkness powers. The Vanguard's official stance was that no Guardian should wield the darkness. It was too risky, had corrupted countless before, but Zavala could not deny the value in the exploration of new power, especially in these trying times. I'll note that after the Guardian embraced stasis for the first time, other Guardians followed suit, and while many Guardians did not fall to any sort of temptation, were able to wield this power without suffering the fate such as Dredge and Yor, there were those that the whispers got to them, the promises of unending power, subjecting the universe to your will, and embracing the power within. Those temptations got to them, and it created some monsters that had to be put down. It seems that part of Shin's thesis also came to pass. Elsie, Anna, and the Guardian continued to hunt down the secrets of the Bray family, and eventually uncovered vast myriads of these secrets the sisters' grandfather had kept from them, many of them found in a mysterious logbook. Clovis Bray I wasn't just a technological genius, founder of the biggest tech corporation of the Golden Age, or one of the original creators of the Warmind Rasputin. He knew about the darkness before possibly anyone else. At least, he knew there was a great ancient power. Untapped. Dangerous. He knew of the anomalous artifact found on Luna by the K1 team, theorized by one to be a transceiver to possibly the home of the Traveler, and also the cause of nightmares, insomnia, hallucinations, and extreme paranoia. The K1 mission's unfortunate demise was covered up by the Bray Corporation and the Aeronautics of China, but Clovis would follow a signal from the artifact to Europa and found Clarity Control, and found what he called Clarity Control. Finally, unmapped secrets, impossible dreams, a chance to pass beyond the infinite and escape the tyranny of causal closure, a promised solution to the indifference of the cosmos. Purpose, salvation. Clovis had found an artifact of the pyramids deep within the Europan ice, landed there not 20 years before his own arrival. He called it Clarity Control, and its effect, Clarity. This artifact presented a visage similar to the one found in the now contained artifact at K1. Clarity Control had peculiar properties. It broke physical symmetry. Clarity would reduce the entropy of a system, and that entropy, that complexity, could not be reversed by Clarity. Its effect only went in one direction, the direction of simplicity. In thermodynamic terms, this effect would paracausally remove thermal energy from a system, defying the second law of thermodynamics, and slow atoms down to virtual stillness. What Clovis was describing was indeed paracausality, but it was also what the Guardians would come to know as stasis, and he too experimented with this power, at the expense of so many lives. Later research conducted by the hidden agent Chowko Young and his ghost would conclude that stasis energy sucks the entropy out of a system, forming rigid crystalline structures that convert thermal energy into mechanical work, producing a highly volatile substance. No wonder why stasis was such a consuming existential cold. One could say it was a direct antithesis to the pure quantum release of energy that was solar light, or solar energy. Clovis was led to Europa by the pyramids, for it was there he would fulfill his life's ultimate purpose, to end mortality. Bray's pursuit of the Fontaine de Jouvence, as he would call it, was nothing short of egomaniacal. Countless people died in the experimental creation of the first Exos. It turns out putting human consciousness into a machine body proved much more difficult than originally thought. But, lucky for Clovis, it would seem that this power of darkness was the key. The human brain rejected the artificialness of the exobody. Its consciousness would billboard, as Bray would come to call it. It would gradually shut down as the exomind enters a feedback loop of self-assessing, repetitive behaviors. This would gradually result in involuntary writhing of the limbs, and the exobodies would tear themselves apart. This was how Clovis Bray's very son died. But Clarity gave Clovis instructions to build a portal, a Vex Gate that would lead right to one of the Vex's Forge Stars. A Vex Gate that would lead right to one of the Vex's Forge Stars, extremely ancient, dating back to the early universe. This was the beginning of the Vex's stranglehold on Europa, but it gave Clovis the material he didn't realize he needed, Vex Radiolaria. This was usually infectious to any material it touched, but exposure of it to Clarity reified its reductive effect. Clarity's reductive effect. A tiny aliquot of this fluid in the exomind gave it just enough instability, similar to a biological brain, that kept a human's consciousness stimulated, constantly checking, self-assessing, and forming. Clovis's breakthrough was also a huge breakthrough for Guardians in the lore community who were wondering just exactly what the nature of the darkness was. It involved individual power, reducing to simplicity. Stasis is it acting on the pure physical world, and we also see how these same concepts can be applied to individual minds and consciousness. Looking back at it, should we be so surprised? The sword logic proselytizes violent culling of all life deemed less perfect than the hive. An unveiling tells us that darkness is simplicity manifest. Is it not so different when stasis simplifies the structure of atoms? Or when exomind fluid introduces a paracausal effect that the mind must account for by simplifying itself, retaining its own entropic state? In the biological world, when organisms defect and consume one another, they process their energy to retain their own entropic shape and fight the constant decay into formlessness, the entropy of existence. Is this not the darkness at work? Let me read an excerpt from Unveiling I intentionally skipped over before. In the beginning, your world was a garden too. The whole floor of the world sea was a mat of bacteria, and the very first animals, adorable blobs of ooze, grazed upon that mat in endless idyll. And then, one day, the fall occurred. So much earlier, and so much more necessary than your myths remember. Some poor mutant discovered that it could collect carbon compounds much faster if it stopped grazing on the bacterial mat and started dissecting and eating the lumps of pre-digested carbon all around it, its neighbor oozeballs. It couldn't help but do it. It couldn't help but thrive. We don't get a choice about the rules. We just play the game. It was the first defector, the first predator. It changed everything. Now the oozeballs needed sensors to watch for danger, and brains to integrate those senses and generate plans of survival, and swift neurons and muscles to enact that plan. This was the Cambrian explosion, the great birth of complex life on your world. I caused it. I, the defector, the destroyer, the one who takes. How salvation was contained to Europa, with Aramis frozen in the very power she sought to save her people. During this time, the Hive made moves through Sol. Xivu-Arath, god of war, began beachheading her forces across the system, consuming the minds of any beings whose will was too weak to resist war's call, thus creating the Wrathborn. An old friend rose from the Hellmouth, left to die by Savathun at the hands of her sister. Osiris came about with half of his soul disparaged. His ghost, Sagira, was slain by Xivu Arat's High Celebrant, but lucky enough, a surprising new ally helped the now lightless warlock out of the Hellmouth. We quickly found out Sol wasn't the only system subject to Xivu Arath's influence. Keitel, Princess Imperial, daughter of the deposed Emperor Callus, co-conspirator of Gaul against her own father, Empress of the true Cabal Empire, washed up on the shores of this war-torn system.
Even my people have a word for peace, but we do not use it often or lightly. I wouldn't have summoned you if I was not sincere.
Peace with the Cabal.
The darkness crowds the edges of this system. The Hive serves it. You'll fall to one, if not the other. My world did.
Empress Keitel, I'm sorry for what you've lost.
We have all suffered. I propose an alliance.
Cabal don't ally. They conquer. She betrayed her father to Gaul. Don't think she won't put a gilded knife in your back, too.
My father was soft.
He lacked ambition.
As you do. Humanity won't survive unless the Commander expands his horizons. Join my empire. You'll keep your title and gain a seat on my war council. With my army and your light, the Cabal will crush the Hive. Then, the Black Fleet. Bow.
No.
Very well. Ready yourself, Commander. I'll sharpen my gilded knife and see you both on the battlefield.
And so the Guardians became champions, slaying Cabal opponents, albeit begrudgingly, in Cabal ancient rites of proving. With the help of Crow, liberated from the shore, Osiris, advisor to Commander Zavala, and Saladin, the Iron Lord, the Vanguard showed their strength, but also their solidarity with any peoples willing to join them in the fight against the darkness. Saladin's brutal will, inherited from countless atrocities across centuries, insisted the Vanguard wage war with the Cabal. After all, they did not stay their blades during the Red War. But Crow, having lived in the Reef a number of years, insisted that there must be a way for peace to be had. A young, naive mind, so full of hope. Zavala stayed vigilant and did what he believed to be the best for his people, for the city, for the traveler, and for it, new bonds were made, and old sins forgiven.
I didn't order this. Bring me the one who pulled the trigger. They'll know who did.
Are you all right?
I'm alive.
The new alliance between the Cabal and the Vanguard did not come without dissent. Many leaders within the Cabal despised Keidel's willingness to work with humanity, but after the fall of Tor Bottle, Keidel saw what a society obsessed with war and conquest can manifest, both figuratively and literally. A Scion dissident faction recovered technology thought long gone, technology from Gauls held in secret by the Hake Corporation, and with its light-suppressing capabilities, Zavala was almost assassinated. These were troubling times, to say the least. But not before long, yet another existential threat shored up onto the city, this time encompassing it in shadow, the Endless Night. It was a strange assault, the likes of it never before seen by the Vanguard. Ikora and Osiris quickly got to work, and determined that it was some sort of Vex simulation superimposed on the city. Its goal? Unclear, but research from the Future War Cult hypothesized it may be a type of psychological warfare, inducing increased restlessness and sleep loss. But the simulation itself was also a trap, as probe scans received rewritten data used to infiltrate city systems, shutting off water and power. The Vanguard at this time accepted any hands willing to help, and when the Vex's front found targets on Europa, the Guardians were deployed. Over the years, there have been rumors of a Guardian fire team that included an unorthodox member, an Eliksni. This Eliksni was rumored to have been shown mercy by a Guardian on Titan during the Red War, and before Aramis's ascension to Kell of Darkness on Europa, this mysterious Eliksni helped the Guardians thwart her raid on a Cryptarch vault housing an ancient technology. His name is Mithrax, the self-appointed Kell of House of Light, devoted to reuniting the Eliksni under the peace of the Traveler. But fleeing Europa was no easy task, and with the help of the Guardian, Mithrax used his abilities as a sacred splicer to send the Guardian into the Vex network and help the House of Light escape to the city. But there was something off about this assault. Curia clip. The Vanguard elected to establish a refugee camp for House Light in the Batsa district, formerly invaded by the Fallen. The peace was tentative at best, as the Eliksni and the Guardians assigned to protect them learned to live with each other's monsters. But it would have to do, for now, as Mithrax's expertise as a splicer was needed for further incursions into the Vex network in order to end the Endless Night. Cryptarch analysis of the splicer gauntlet showed an attunement to the residual light found in the environment, manipulating that light to resonate at frequencies that can interfere with any nearby data networks, and, given the Guardian's unique relationship to the light, they can easily power their gauntlets and manifest corporeally within the Vex network itself. With Mithrax's guidance, this was the key to stopping this invasion, including showing us an interesting aspect of the nature of the light. It's everywhere. It seems the speaker wasn't just talking abstractly when he said the light is in all places, in all things. Its physical nature makes up the nature of our universe. And while the Cryptarch's understanding of it is very bare bones and scientific, the Eliksni's understanding of the light, especially those in House of Light, was much more spiritual and culturally involved. In my opinion, there is inherent value in seeing all of these different perspectives on the light. As time passed, the Vex network changed, and it filled with Taken, their presence an indicator of a more sinister plot behind the Vex offensive. A strange song emanated in binary from the Endless Night simulation, a song recognized by Guardians familiar with Hive Arcana. And lastly, on a routine offensive, Mithrax and the Guardian uncovered the true mind behind the Endless Night. Curia, Blade Transform, a Vex mind taken by Oryx, responsible for the Dreaming City's time loop curse. And most important of all, the hand manipulating Curia's strings was the Witch Queen, Savathun. The people of the city grew restless, paranoid, resentful. There had already been civilian unrest. Many already did not buy into the Guardians being their immortal saviors. From their perspective, they saw people dragged back from the grave who cared for very little but the glory of defeating enemies, much less the short, minuscule lives of mortals. The consensus was nothing but an illusion of democracy propped up by a military oligarchy. The Speaker was dead. The Hunter Vanguard, dead. And now Guardians wielded the darkness, made allies with the Cabal that almost destroyed everyone in the city, and now let the Fallen into their walls? It was just too much. Tensions grew. Civilians ransacked the Eliksni quarters' ether supplies, and it did not help that the Guardian used stasis to quell the conflict, something absolutely abhorrent to civilians and House Light alike. While many Guardians eagerly embraced dark power, this was not the case for everyone else in the system. The darkness was an indicator of doom, of damnation, of death. New understandings took time to settle in. And who's to say that these new understandings about the darkness and wielding it were proven? We barely knew the consequences at the time. And at the head of all this civilian unrest, we find Lakshmi too, leader of the Future War Cult, seer of potential futures, and she would lead the ideological charge against the Vanguard, rallying the citizens in a common and inherited xenophobia, all to save the city from an alien threat that she saw as inevitable.
People of the Lost City, I come to you with an emergency announcement. One that Vanguard leadership wishes to keep from you. Future War Cult has learned from Guardian sources that the endless night is the work of the hive god of deceit, Savathun. This is a grave development, but we cannot give in to despair. Instead, let it propel us to action. We must demand accountability from Vanguard leadership. We cannot allow Zavala and Ikora Ray to sell our city to the Fallen. Why?
Enough! This is Ikora Ray. I will not stand by while this hateful rhetoric goes unchallenged. I understand it's hard to put the violence of the past behind us. But the Vanguard's responsibility is to preserve a just peace. Not for some, but for all. Lakshmi would have you live in fear. Fear of the Eliksni. Fear of the future. But I propose something much stronger. Faith. Faith that bravery is not just a human quality. Faith that we are stronger together. Faith that the Vanguard and our Eliksni allies will break the Vex hold on our city. And we'll do it united, as one, for the good of all.
She conspired with the other faction leaders to initiate a coup, and rumor has it that she even garnered help from Osiris to ensure a peaceful transfer of power. Things were not looking well for the stability of the last city. Eventually, the Guardians in Mithrax located Curia, destroyed it, and the Endless Night could start to be unraveled. But Lakshmi was convinced in her beliefs. As her final ploy, Lakshmi built a Vex Gate in the Batsa district in order to banish the House of Light for good. But as with all things, it came back to bite her. Vex swarmed through the portal, killing her immediately. The Vanguard rallied one more time, and stood tall as the protectors of everyone.
If we do not survive, this is the story Eliksni will tell of the Saint standing beside us.
And you with me, Cal of Cows. Together, we are enough.
More than enough.
It isn't too late. You can still be forgiven.
Be careful. I'll hold you to it.
Savathun had been in our midst ever since what we thought was Osiris crawled out of that hellmouth. This would explain some of his strange behavior, his callousness towards Saint, his conspiring with Lakshmi. In fact, there had been subtle hints toward this ever since Crow and the Guardian followed those paracausal birds into the EDZ, found Savathun's taken around the Shard of the Traveler, and the Traveler itself gifted an effigy of the Hawkmoon to Crow and the Guardian. Here we see Savathun observing the Crow and the Guardian from what we thought at the time was a distant place, but it turns out it was from someone right next to them, who they thought to be Osiris. What is this feeling? I did not ask for it. I do not understand it. I do not want it. The Crow is so carefree in his ignorance. The bonfire's glow lights up his pale features, and I am drawn to the hope in his gold eyes. Where is the despairing child I anticipated? He drinks from an open bottle of wine against the recommendation of his ghost. The Guardian encourages him, and they are laughing. This celebration is maddening. Neither have reason to be so jubilant. Their world is ending, and they thrash like dying creatures in the final light of collapsing stars. They do not seem to acknowledge the futility of their existence, the impermanence of it in the face of cosmic annihilation. I am reminded of my sisters, of moments spent by lapping shores, gazing up at infinite stars full of possibilities and wonder. I am left yearning. What is this feeling? I do not understand it. I do not want it. It is no accident that this feeling explained by Savathun runs in parallel to Savathun's Taken arriving and studying the Shard of the Traveler. Savathun sought to reach beyond the sword logic. Everything that we've seen from her up to this point has been her almost undermining the sword logic, showing how futile faith in it really is. She's been trying to win this game of existence, of becoming the Hive's final shape. Savathun sought to excise herself of her worm. Savathun did not stay silent during her time imprisoned in the Dreaming City. She weaved lies in between truths in an indiscernible fashion, even giving Crow back his memories of Uldren. And after months of preparing for the ritual, when the time came, the worm gods roared in defiance. Xivu Arath assaulting her sister, trying to stop the ritual. The sword logic could not be usurped. It was the one way, the only way the universe could be. It was truth in and of itself. Everyone was suspicious and anticipated what would happen after the ritual. But perhaps the most unexpected thing did happen. Savathun kept up her end of the bargain, and in a deep coma, Osiris was returned, and the Witch Queen slithered away before Marasov could deal a killing blow. There was only a week between the end of the ritual and the beginning of what seemed like the end, our first step into the beyond. During this week, trusted guardians received a hidden dossier seemingly from Ikora herself, rich with documents describing natures of stasis, reports on Guardians' power levels, observations on how the light is like a web that contains everything connected to it, allowing Guardians to draw similar powers from each other. These are perhaps, in my opinion, the most important parts of the hidden dossier. It is Ikora reflecting on what exactly she as the Warlock Vanguard should be preaching about the nature of light and darkness. What philosophies can we hold to unite us all as guardians in an era where dogmatic devotion to the light is just running out of style and could not possibly be the only answer to art, the only answer to the Black Fleet? Here are some excerpts from the dossier. If the light forgets while the darkness remembers, then why does a ghost's power of determination let it access latent memories imprinted in the dead? That's paradoxical. That should be a property of the darkness. How can such fundamentally opposed forces do the same thing? Illumination. Light and darkness manifest. It all comes together. The erratic ghosts, Ransom's grudge, the Psychometer and Glycon Volatus, and the Xeno Island, and the Go game with Zavala, and the Sacred Void, and the Silence of the Light, and even the Drifter's ghost. It all means one thing. Darkness remembers. Light forgets. It is about memory. Memory in forgiveness. The prisoner's dilemma, a relic of the days of the high carceral system. Naive rationality, which was the assumption in the first days of behavior theory, always led to the common failure. Always. Both prisoners blame each other and go to jail for 5 years. No other outcome is possible. No matter what one prisoner does, the other benefits from turning on their ally. So both players will rationally defect, and rationally doom each other to 5 years in prison. Even though each might have escaped with just 1 year if they cooperated, by acting to seek the selfish best, they deny themselves the global best. Now we turn to evolution, the rule that made us all. Evolution is not a simple zero-sum fight to the death. It has room for cooperation and coexistence. But it ultimately rewards systems that perpetuate their own survival. It is a local optimizer, like the players in the prisoner's dilemma. It only cares about who is ahead now. It is impossible for evolution to reward those who sacrifice themselves for others. Evolution can only reward those who benefit from the sacrifice, and the winners don't carry the self-sacrifice gene. The only altruism that evolves under these rules is the tit-for-tat exchange. But we are not restricted by evolution. We have minds. We have memories and imaginations and culture. We can imagine the consequences of our actions and select those which suit a world we want to live in. We can do this without waiting for generations of genetic change. We can enshrine the common good as a norm. We can say, everyone who cooperates is good, and everyone who defects is evil, and evil defectors will be harshly punished. We can say, by cooperating for the greatest common good, we will all be elevated. So let's do that. The most human strategy is some variant of tit for tat. You tend to cooperate, but do unto others as they do to you. Start nothing, but if you are hit back hard, hit back harder each time. They are now trapped in an infinite war. The only way out is a moment of grace, cooperation, spontaneously and for no reason, after 20 years of war, forgiveness without cause, unilateral mercy, declaring peace. This is the value of forgetting. Forget they hurt you. Forget what's rational. Do what's right. The Psychometer lets us glimpse ancient memory, not because the light cannot remember, but because it chooses to relieve us of memory's grief. The Glycon Volatus is infested with the residue of evil's touch because the darkness is there, and the darkness remembers the suffering aboard, haunted like the nightmares on the moon. This is why the light wipes away memory. It strikes away the pain of the past to break the pattern, to create the possibility of grace. This is why the dark remembers. We need to remember how we were hurt, so we can avoid being hurt again. This is the message I need, not some sophisticated exegesis of paracausal semiotics. This one thought: grace and memory. The light offers escape from endless cyclic violence. The darkness remembers the hurt that was done to us, so that we cannot be exploited by those who would hurt us again. We need the darkness to avoid being preyed upon by those who see light as an opportunity to feed. But we need the light too. The light is the hope of grace through the grace of hope, the possibility to be more than what reason allows us. Because by acting unreasonably, we escape reasonable limits. This is how we reconcile light and dark. This is the message we must teach to a new guardian, Sennaret. Even I have begun to believe that our enemy may not be the darkness itself, but a power or principality that commands and rules in darkness. But you are right. Guardians do mistake the traveler's silence for weakness. They do see the constant necessity of violence, and the rewards they reap through that violence, as a reason to disdain peace and virtue as dull. Guardians want action and meaning and loot. All guardians have experienced devotion, sacrifice, and death. This separates us from the rest of humankind. But sometimes we let this separation divide us from the ordinary good of ordinary people. We forget what it means to live in a peaceful life surrounded by the friends we choose. Because we can endure death and violence, we forget how horrible and final violence can be. The nature of your death, Sennaret, means you cannot forget that. You know that you were killed by other people, not by a great darkness from the stars. The only question on how to live well in a universe of indifference, cruelty, and deprivation is the only question. The light does not offer us an afterlife or an otherworldly paradise. It does not give us throne worlds or pocket universes. The light tells us that paradise is something we have to make here. The darkness cautions us against mercy to our enemies. Are we fools for trying to be good when our very survival is at stake? Maybe. But the fact that our morals sometimes make it more difficult to survive is proof they are truly good. There is not much commendable about doing a right thing when it is also the tactically correct thing. When the good thing is also the hard thing, that is when the righteous are separated from the lost. Sennaret, let me tell you something I have told no one else. I know that in the end, the darkness can win. Do you understand what I mean? By its very nature, the darkness is the judge of what will exist and what will pass away. In the end, there may only be darkness because all that exists will remain only by its consent. But the light grants us freedom from existence alone as the measurement of our worth. Oh, evolution has made us afraid of non-existence, certainly. And it is good to fear and to avoid non-existence because without existence, we cannot experience joy. The idea that death is an escape from suffering is a trap. Death is not an escape from anything. It is a wall, a cessation, meaningless. I do not ask anyone to embrace death. There is no possibility in death. Life is our only chance to live. Darkness helps us avoid death. It helps us to go on existing. It is necessary. We must remember what hurt us so we will not. We must remember what hurt us so that we will not be hurt again. But darkness alone points to an eternal existence of mere survival, to a universe where the only judge of a good existence is the ability to go on existing. It is the grace of the light that grants us the dignity to choose a finite life of compassion and common good over an eternity of competitive subsistence. The darkness, or the being that speaks for it, claims that the claims that the extermination of all those who choose the light is inevitable, that the universe will be inherited by morally impoverished advantage seekers like the Vex and Hive. Logically, I cannot see an escape, so long as I accept the darkness as logic. But that is exactly why we fight, Senaret. Not to preserve our own lives, but to preserve the possibility that we represent. When all choices are measured by the fitness payoff, by what they do to benefit the continued existence of the chooser, the darkness has won completely. The most important thing we can do, the most formidable blow we can strike against our true enemy, is to offer irrational grace, to choose unreasonable hope and unreasoning compassion, even if it goes against calculated advantage. It is only by disregarding the logic of mere survival that we can create a possibility of existence outside that logic. So, if they do not offer you a spot at the campfire, if they call you naive, if they dislike your complaints about the casual violence of the casually violent, if they quote from the unveiling texts, tell you how the gardener lost because it always stopped to offer peace, and the winnower always struck, then ask who they would rather sit by at the fire, gardener or winnower. Then ask them if they would like to live in the universe where no one ever sits beside anyone else at the fire. Never forget that even in the miserable logic of the prisoner's dilemma, it is the cooperators who create the best world. Two cooperators will score higher together than two defectors ever could. A world of cooperators would defeat a world of defectors if the defectors could only be kept away from the cooperators' bounty. Never forget what we achieve together, what we accomplish by leavening darkness with light and light with darkness. Tempering grace with memory and memory with grace is quite literally more than the darkness alone can imagine. The Hive may have extinguished entire galaxies of allied life, but before the Hive came, those Ecumenes accomplished titanic works. What do the Hive have to show for all their conquest? Miserable warrens and rotting moons. Even their libraries are just catalogs of death. Even their own queens want a way out. Never give up hope. If it is possible to live well, then it is worthwhile to try. If it is possible to exist by the rules of the light, then the darkness is forever defeated. It cannot dominate all things for all time. Above all else, when you are in the deepest pits of despair, I offer you this. I believe that there is no reason the Traveler chose to make its stand here at Earth, instead of at Reese or any other world before. I do not believe in any special quality it detected in humanity, nor in any great tactical advantage the Traveler gained by vouchsafing its power to us. It did not release its ghosts as a move in a scheme of incomprehensible complexity, or because we fit the criteria of an ancient plan. It did not compute the set of contingencies which could permit its own survival, a 1 in a trillion pathway through a thicket of certain death. I believe the Traveler simply could not bear to abandon one more infant possibility. So it chose an act of unreasonable grace. Clarity in action, Ikora Rey. Guardians, do not mistake the Traveler's silence for weakness. To recite the dreams of Alpha Lupi, thought to come from the Traveler itself all that time ago, and even told to Glovis Bray by the Traveler, the best voices that truly matter, never allow themselves to be heard. This lesson is worth learning again and again, forever. The choice is never mine. It is always yours. Guardians, I believe our first true step beyond was when the Witch Queen Savathun stole our light, and then we were slapped in the face with the more horrifying realization of the truth. She didn't steal our light. She was given the light. Just as there was folly in allowing memory and trauma rule every action, destroying any chance for peaceful futures, there was also folly in the pure logic of the light. defined by its naivety, defined by its lack of memory, and defined by its willingness to forgive. We don't know exactly why the Traveler granted Savathun and her hive the light, but if you were to ask me, it's because the Traveler could not bear to see another infant possibility die at their hands. Mercy is necessary for peace and a better world, perhaps an unreasonable amount of grace and mercy. And in the words of Lord Saladin, mercy to an enemy cannot come at the cost of mercy for their victims.
Isn't this interesting? I miscalculated. So did you, Guardian. So protective of your Traveler that you wouldn't let me keep it safe. But the Witness is coming. The game is yours to play now. Yours to win or lose. Just don't say I didn't warn you.
But hopefully these summative reports on the different aspects of darkness and our different eras of understanding them, first starting with contact with the Hive and their sword logic, with the hinting that there might be something stronger, more ancient, more eldritch underneath, to this further abstraction, visions of pyramids, tales of noble heroes turning towards the darkness in hope that one day it might be used in tandem with the light, to the arrival of the pyramids, and the Witness outreaching to us for the first time, offering us darkness and attempting to define it for us. Guardians, I have learned that asking the right questions is much more important than any answer as we step into the beyond. We know about the sword logic, the entity in the darkness called the Witness, its influence on our system. We know the philosophies that these paracausal forces represent. But the question of what we do with them as Guardians might be the only question that matters. What is the Witness's final shape? Why does it seek to destroy all hope, everything the Traveler touched? So the Traveler would have to make a stand? So it could approach and rip out its heart? Why has the Witness won in every other timeline? And if so, what hope do we really have?
She used to say, Praetith, there's always room in the mind for hope. It's the crack that lets the light in.